Hi and welcome to F World, the Fragility podcast. Together with guests from around the globe, we explore how fragility manifests across economics, politics, security, culture, development, and the environment, and how we can build a more resilient future together. We are your hosts. My name is Johan Bergman, and with me I have Mihaela Carstei and Paul Bisca. Today we're speaking with Sara Noshadi. Sara started her professional career as an anthropologist with a Franco-Iranian mission in Iran. Later, she joined UNESCO in Paris and moved to Afghanistan in 2012 to work on culture and post-conflict reconstruction, a UNESCO program which started following the overthrow of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan in 2001. Sara's work focused on restoring and increasing public awareness of Afghanistan's unique cultural heritage, such as the Buddhas of Bamiyan, which the Taliban had tried to erase from history by establishing the Bamiyan Cultural Center. She also worked on safeguarding the minaret of Jam and the Musalla complex of Herat, and much, much more. She then went on to establish and lead Afghanistan's national program for culture and creative economy and managed the multi-partner trust fund that financed that initiative, as well as edit a book on safeguarding Afghanistan's cultural heritage in the post-conflict setting. Since 2018, she has been overseeing the cultural recovery and reconstruction in post-Daesh Iraq. She has a master's degree in anthropology and another one in cultural heritage management, and she is a PhD candidate in economics at the Sorbonne, where she explores the role of cultural and creative industries in post-conflict economic recovery. We are very excited to have her with us today to talk about an oft overlooked and underestimated topic in post-conflict reconstruction and prevention of fragility in general: culture. Sara, very welcome to F World. So, just as we kick off, could you share with us a little bit more about the people and the ideas that have really shaped your career and how you think about what you're doing in your work?
Well, I studied anthropology at University of Tehran, and I think anthropology is what shaped my life and made me who I am, in the sense that even though I didn't work for long as an anthropologist, but it defines still today the paradigm of my thinking. And this is also why I work in culture in the broad sense of it, in anthropological sense of it. At the time when I studied at the University of Tehran, the anthropology that was taught there was the French School of Anthropology. So I'm not sure if it changed or not, but I see myself as a structuralist, very much. At the time, but still very much learned from the structuralism School of Anthropology, Levi-Strauss. And of places. In 2007, I went for a 3-month trip to Central Asia. And I think this was where I decided about what to do in my life and my career. Since I saw the impact of cultural programs in post-Civil War Tajikistan. The programs I saw were French-funded and French Culture Center, but it wasn't only an example of how much you can do and how you can change people's life with small fundings in culture. Then I joined UNESCO in 2010 here in Paris at the World Heritage Center, and later I moved to Afghanistan. And traveling in Central Asia and seeing post-Civil War Tajikistan gave me the idea, but what really shaped my career is Afghanistan. Because I was lucky enough to actually be able to work with large culture programs, which is not usual in international development, because because funding for culture is limited. And then to build a team, to work with the government, and well, Afghanistan, it was difficult and challenging experience, but the difficulty wasn't the war. It was the fact that nothing was working on daily basis, and that the country really moved me and pushed me to my limits almost every day, but also it pushed me beyond my limits almost every day, and I'm very thankful for the experience. And I suppose that's the reason 3 years on, but I haven't moved on from Afghanistan yet, and I follow the news on daily basis, and breaks my heart what is happening in Afghanistan, because it hasn't improved since 2012 that I remember. And in Afghanistan, I met Scott Guggenheim, who was at the time the advisor to the president of Afghanistan, who himself is by education is an anthropologist and was very much interested in actually reintroducing culture in Afghanistan national development framework. And with Scott, we worked to make this happen with the line ministries, and this is really rare. I before and after the Afghanistan experience, I worked with many countries. I worked in international development, and that experience was rare to have at the same time the funding, the organization, and the government at the level of at the very high level, presidential level, and several line ministries to work together to reintroduce culture. And Scott became a very close friend and my mentor ever since. We are still trying sometimes to work together, though we are not working directly together. And I think I said almost all, not almost all, but anyway, maybe I go back to Afghanistan again for the in future questions, in next questions. But yeah, that's it.
I wanted to ask you something about the trip to Central Asia that you made. It seems like from what you said, this was the moment when you thought, not only is this important for me, but it's actually a vocation. It's what I want to do. So what about that trip exactly? What were your impressions that made you think that, okay, I'm going to take this route?
Well, at the time I was working as an anthropologist, and well, anthropology is it's very close to my heart. But then I realized that I have to move from an academic to a manager, or to someone who can manage culture programs, or can do this as a job in the sense that I didn't, on my daily work as an anthropologist, I didn't feel that I can actually do good. Like I couldn't see the result of anything I was doing in the life of others. But in Central Asia, I saw how simply by going to, I don't know, a theater class or language class changed people's life, and this is where I decided that working in this area is what I would like to do. At the time, I still didn't know how difficult it is to convince others how important culture is and how can change people's life. I was kind of naive in the sense that I thought it's obvious. It's everyone would know and would know it by heart. Then I realized that culture is something that people like to talk about over a glass of Chardonnay, but the day after, when they go to their work meetings, the same economist who was very much interested in culture would not would not accept that culture is important enough actually to fund. And but it has been an interesting path. Like I never felt frustrated doing this, and I never felt frustrated justifying that culture is important. In the sense that I always felt that I'm doing something. I can't say for a greater good, because I really don't believe in greater good. I'm very pessimist as a person, and I know things are getting worse in the whole world constantly. But at the same time, I managed to actually be very optimistic in my day-to-day work, because that's the only way of continuing. And so that's why I'm saying, when I had to discuss with politicians, when I had to discuss with donor countries, I never felt frustrated. I always felt that how do I say it? It's like it was never about my professional career, like to fundraise for a project or to convince them about a program I'm doing. It was never about that. It was about it has been always about the values I believe in. Even the organization I work for, UNESCO, it has never been about a big bureaucratic organization, which that I would like to climb up its ladder. It has been always about a set of values that UNESCO stands for, that the basic text of UNESCO stands for. And so for example, I never felt uncomfortable if someone criticized the UN or the United Nations agencies, or the work we are not doing, or how we can't do it, because this is not what I mean. What we stand for is not this machine, is the set of values, and they are still I think they're always relevant, no matter how we no matter how what our record is.
Sara, since anthropology seems to have defined everything you've done afterwards, I'm really curious, what took you to anthropology? What about the way you grew up made you decide anthropology is the thing you wanted to study?
I actually did my high school diploma in math physics, and I was set to study electrical engineering. But the last year, when I was 18, just before going to university, I decided to I was reading and then watching documentaries about Pompeii, and how people's life haven't changed since then. I mean, Pompeii was a really good example of actually connecting archaeology to anthropology, in the sense that it was in the past, but how everything was well preserved. It could have done. You could do an anthropology of the past also. So it was that last year that I decided to go pass through the university exam, but through humanities, which and then study social science, and that was the decision. It was the first year that anthropology, as a separate branch, separate from social sciences and sociology, was and ethnology, because we had ethnology in Iran, but not anthropology. It was the first year that it was introduced at university, and and this is how I went to study anthropology, and ever since I'm still how do you say it, surprised every day about how much we are alike. People are alike, in the sense that not even geographically, but historically, for hundreds of thousands of years. So when people get, for example, when people get surprised by the archaeological discoveries that, oh, someone, I don't know, 2,000 years ago did the same thing, and this is anthropology and paleoanthropology, teaches us that we haven't changed almost not at all. I mean, the way we can think and our capacity of thinking or living hasn't changed for over 100,000 years, at least. Now they say even a few 100,000 years. So this shared that the fact that people are so much more alike than different, that was what I loved about anthropology. And I think this is, I know we haven't moved to fragility yet, and I think this is where anthropology or culture has a response to fragility, to remind people who are at war with each other that we are much more alike than different. And to me, it seems so basic and so obvious that that's still a puzzle for me. That why culture or this set of values is used more to be as a reason for conflict rather than a reason for peace.
Absolutely, and we couldn't agree more in that. I would like to take us back to where we began a little bit with, you talked about how you came into anthropology through the structuralism school of Levi Strauss, and through a quick Googling, I realized that is, cultural anthropology, which is a very much a systems approach to anthropology. So could you use that framework and explain to us a little bit how you define culture? What are the aspects and the building blocks of culture as you see it, and how they can build a foundation for, as you say, creating cohesion instead of sowing division in a society?
Well, my definition of anthropology is my definition of culture is actually what anthropology says. It's much broader than what I do as a job, which is defined into tangible culture, intangible, and is a set of values. But fortunately I don't know any international development program that use this definition of culture to work. But I think the fact that how structuralism can help, how this definition of culture can help people and can create social and culture cohesion. I don't think it's about people. I think it's about or convincing people. I think it's about restructuring the systems. It's about how the governments deal with that. It's about how international community deals with culture. In general, I think it's the way to fix things. Again, is the fixing structures, not people. So I will never. Deep inside, even I never blame people to get trapped in this in this paradigm that is created for them. I would rather. I think the way to go is for culture to be taken into account. And again, I said I'm puzzled why it's not culture to be taken into account by the governments and by decision makers in fragile states. And you know that the decision makers are the ones with money. I mean, there is it will stay a nice discussion over Chardonnay if funding is not involved.
Of course, and it really is about those funds, and to really backing up that discussion on Chardonnay with the real substantive project. So one thing that I'm curious about in that sense is could you talk a little bit more about how those systems need to change from being those divisive systems to being more uniting, and making sure that people pull in the same directions, using culture rather than the opposite. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I'm writing a thesis on that, so I still don't have all the answers. But I know why they don't work. I mean, I've seen it. I experienced it myself. First, culture is not in the agenda. I mean, the agenda of the discussion. So to get a seat at the table, as someone who promotes culture, it's a difficult process. Then, of course, fundings. Well, when the post-conflict reconstruction, post-war, post-disaster reconstruction starts, the first thing is to define the needs, to allocate the funds to what's needed. And culture is never in the first lines of what is needed. And I understand the economists, they have to choose between investing in economy, investing in energy section, for example, mining, or culture. And of course, they go for something that quickly thinks to have return. The problem with, I can't say a problem, but the issue with culture is that the return is not quick. While the agenda for post-conflict reconstruction is very it's time bound, in the sense that international community goes and thinks that, okay, we have 3 years, we have 5 years to fix this country, and the funding cycle also is 1 year, 2 years, so you can never plan for long term, and it's not interesting for the decision makers to invest in something that wouldn't have quick win. The problem is that then we go for 20 years, for 30 years, and I don't know any example of actually a quick win in fixing fragility. But the problem is that every time we go, we plan for a quick solution. If, for example of Afghanistan, it's been 20 years. If first year there was a 20-year plan, we wouldn't be where we are now. The problem is that it was a 2-year plan, 3-year plan. Every few years we were towards the end of it. So we plan, basically we go through a long-term process of 20 years. We spend the same amount or more of money, but we plan for it short term. And that's the other problem, because culture can never be a quick win. And actually, the example of why we worked in Afghanistan to develop the national program for culture and creative economy, we did a 10-year program, and it was between UNESCO and the Afghan government, because we said, no matter if international community, if the forces withdrawing from the country, Afghanistan was still there, UNESCO will still be there. Let's have a 10-year program to be able to work, because for so many years we worked with short-term projects of a year, maximum 2 years, and as we call them projects, and defining in that national program, we tried to actually include it in a 5-year national development framework program of Afghanistan also, and working in culture not only through the Ministry of Culture, which is the usual idea that comes to mind, but through Ministry of Finance, through Ministry of Urban Development, through local governance. So in every aspect of culture, basically to do other things with a cultural point of view, with a cultural paradigm. So to do mining with a cultural paradigm, and mining is actually an important program in Afghanistan. To do urban planning with this, there is something very simple. For example, if you see Kabul, there is no space for people gathering around each other, like no urban space. Or no culture center, or every aspect of it. Or for example, when there is a plan for a new mining site, all these studies of heritage and social and cultural impact assessment comes after the decisions are made, not before. That it's actually the mining the mining money who then comes to do these studies and to prove that something was right or done, or it was thought through process. Yeah, I jumped here and there, but the thing is, I think on how to do it is to first reintroduce it into the agendas of everyone, the government and international community decision makers.
So, as you were talking about how we spend the money that we currently spend on culture and development, it made me think about a hypothesis, and I'm really curious what you think about it. But first of all, we spend the money on things that we value, which then sort of brings to mind the conversation you just had about values as the basis for culture. And first, I want to address the issues that we have with the word culture and its meanings, such as culture as a group's particular way of life, culture as a process of individual enrichment, and culture as an activity or product, such as museums, theater, concerts, books, and movies. So, culture is usually more than the sum of these definitions, and we have to specify which meaning of culture we're referring to. And here's the thing, that the lack of specificity about the meaning of culture actually ends up obscuring the cause and effect mechanism, such as, for example, how it obscures things like how investing in cultural programs can lead to far wider economic growth, which is not directly associated with those programs, by changing or reviving the culture of a group of people of a country. So my hypothesis is the following, is that development institutions are missing this the transmission channels between the different meanings of culture, as well as the role that values actually play in that mechanism. So more precisely, they can't see how culture defined as an activity or product, such as museums, literature, theater, will lead to outcomes such as sustained economic growth, because the causality is not direct, and the institutional structures and processes currently in place are not well suited to operating in complex systems where we can have easy and direct tracing of effects. So our bureaucratic systems for spending development funding or funding for culture as an activity would need to understand that cultural activities shape individual societal values. Just remind all of us of the definition being those principles that help us decide what is right and wrong and how to act in various situations. Thus shaping ultimately what is important to us, which then shapes culture as our way of life, as both as a group and as individuals. And only now are we one step removed from influencing economic growth. As studies have shown, different value profiles for different nations lead to different rates of economic growth. And for example, higher levels of trust lead to higher economic growth. So I know this is a long hypothesis, but I'm really curious. Am I wrong? Am I right? What do you think?
No, it is exactly the same, and this is what I had to deal with. For example, building trust has an economic value, but we cannot measure it. Because to measure these things, you have to have funding, to have programs who actually do evaluations, who do baseline study, and then you do an evaluation after. but it's a vicious circle, because it's not that it is impossible. It's not that it's that to measure the value of culture. It's just it is not at the beginning. It's not funded. It's not taken into account, and so you can't do it. For example, we were working with we had fundings to do cultural activities with the internally displaced people in Afghanistan, who were, when I say internally displaced people, it means that they were displaced, for example, for over 30 years. So they were the camps. They gradually became like villages, but people were born in camps and grew up in a camp. And for example, one of our culture programs was for social cohesion, because these camps, they develop around major cities, and the people in major cities, they're not their relationship is hostile. They're not welcoming these IDPs who come from elsewhere in Afghanistan. And one of our cultural activities, there was culture and sport, was theater, and to train these the kids from 4 or 5 year old until under 18 in theater, as a way of allowing them to as a cultural activity, and also as a way of allowing them to talk about themselves. When we first started, when you would ask them what you would like to become, or what you're doing, or what you would like to do in your life, they would say the job of their parents, their father. It was to be a farmer, or to be a cleaner, or to be to someone who works, for example, to carry loads in customs office, customs between in border, and for example, when we finished it, they didn't like to go to school, also because they had to go to school with the kids from the cities that they were actually living around, and they were never respected. Or I understand it's a fight for resources, because the city itself, the main city, also they were poor. And after doing the 3 months of theater, and then having these kids from IDPs to perform in schools, or in culture centers in Herat, it was for a city west of Afghanistan. Then when we were talking to those kids who 3 months ago wanted to become a pastor, for example, or then they had new aspirations. They loved to go to school. Because it was only a 3-month program, for example, that one. But is there any? But if you talk to an economist, they believe that this has value. That if people start to trust the government, for example, or to trust in themselves, it has an economic value. But still we cannot measure it, because there is no baseline study done before and nothing after. And I would like, for example, that 5 years after we do another evaluation on the same group. So it will be a vicious circle. As long as we don't include it in the agenda, we cannot measure its value. And as long as we cannot measure its value, they cannot justify funding it. You said it very well. So my short-term solutions has been always to promote culture, not for to promote culture projects, not for the long-term values they have, but for the short-term. In the sense that, for example, a restoration of a cultural heritage building, we have to justify that it creates jobs, during the projects for people. And that if we don't save it now, in future, when there is, for example, tourism, there is nothing left actually, nothing left of the cultural heritage, for example, the built heritage, to use in future. But this has been our only solution to justify the short-term results of cultural projects. And also, I always say the good thing with culture and cultural projects is that there is almost never a negative impact. In so many other areas, if you do mistakes, there can be actually a negative impact of the project you're doing. In culture, well, the mistake we can do in teaching theater to kids is that not teaching it well. That's the worst that can happen. But still, it's been time spent, the kids around each other playing, So yeah, I still don't know what the solution is, and actually, the best example I can think of is what we tried to do in Afghanistan to just to introduce it, and then because it was introduced into the program and of the Ministry of Finance and actually inside the budget, then they had to track it. Then they had to track the result, and that was a good thing. And now I see that I don't know how many years, 5 years on, the Ministry of Finance of Afghanistan is still following up that National Program for Culture and Creative Economy, even though the theme changed, even though it doesn't rely on people anymore, because it's inside their funding. They have to track its success.
It seems to me that it's hard for them to track the virtuous circles. However, since this is a podcast about fragility, and we're all very familiar with poverty traps, fragility traps, which are actually vicious downward spirals, not upwards, maybe we also need to focus on the downward spiral of losing values, of not addressing culture. And if you're thinking about especially that part of the world, Central Asia, Afghanistan in particular, we could think about what was lost. What sort of center of culture and civilization and progress was that part of the world when, let's say, Europeans had not even discovered the New World? And even though I'm sitting right now here in Washington, D.C., I was born in Romania. And when you compare the level of development in Eastern Europe, around 1,900, it's nowhere near what it was in Central Asia and in Afghanistan, which was at that moment not just the geographic center of the world, but also the cultural center of the world. And another thought that occurred to me as we're talking is the fact that we're having a very similar problem in funding culture as it used to be in funding climate change in the early days. The problem was with climate change, the problem was far enough away, and the results were not very palpable. They were harder to imagine, and the urgency was simply not there, or it wasn't felt to be there. The benefits as well were also not felt to be there. So I don't know if there's something we can learn from the early days of climate change. How can we make the subject better known? The need to understand the downward spirals of losing the kind of values that lead to economic growth. And it might actually be easier than tracking the positive effects of a theater program, which
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. This is when we fail to actually justify what we do. We go the other way. We say that, okay, so let's look at it this way. And this was always a discussion with the donors of let's look at this way, because when we were talking about culture projects, and they were saying, or for example for tourism, or and they were saying, there is no tourist in Afghanistan, and we can't. I mean, they think you're crazy if you talk about tourism in these countries. But we are planning for the next 30 years. I mean, look at Cambodia. We're not planning for next year. So I used what you said, that, okay, let's think about not doing these things. Thinking today, not promoting built heritage. And so in 30 years, because if you believe that one day Afghanistan will be a state, a stable state with tourism, if international community is in Afghanistan spending that much money, it means that they believe that will happen someday. So if you believe that will happen someday, but in the meantime, in this 20 years that you're working in this country, you're not investing in culture, what is left once you actually supposedly fix the country? And unfortunately, and this is from the promoting protection of built heritage to intangible heritage, to build this system of values. And I understand it's kind of it's very political also. Culture is very political. We and I understand. I think those how do you call it? These terrorist groups, they know it better than, I suppose, they know it better than international community, because this is what they attack. This is what they destroy at every level, from the system of values to the tangible representation of culture. And it's strange that you think that our enemy, who is not structured, supposedly, they categorically attack culture. But then when we go to rebuild, culture is not the first thing that we are going to rebuild. And this, again, I'm saying I'm puzzled that how this happens, how this is overlooked. But sometimes I think because culture is political, because it's too political for others to get involved. When you go and when international community goes for a post-conflict reconstruction, they think this is too sensitive to get involved, and it is. But then this is of course the problem with the whole paradigm of post-conflict reconstruction, because the government who is supposed to build the country and work with them is not strong enough to take over. And why it's not strong enough? Because it's not the post-conflict reconstruction is not handed over to the government. The main decisions are not made by the government, because it's not the government who has the money. And it's a catch-22. Of course, I understand the problem is that the government hasn't built trust. There is a problem of potential corruption. But then how this circle has to, and I this is my personal experience. Actually, governments of these countries, they are very well aware of the value of culture and taking it into account. It's just that they don't have the authority, the necessary authority to make decisions. Also, because as all we know, this building this set of values either through school books or either through official education or non-informal education, these are also very difficult decisions for the government themselves also, because they're building a new country, I mean, after, and then it means that they have to build a new they have to define a new identity. So yeah, of course, I mean, we are not naive people who work in culture. Actually, we are aware of the importance of it, but and the complexity of dealing with it. But we should start from somewhere.
You've touched on something that I wanted to ask you from the very beginning. You've just spoken about cultural, so monuments, culture as a target for groups that have different agendas. And I wanted to get your reflection on the following scenario or hypothesis, which is when you have two belligerents in a conflict, one thing is to say that they fight for power, they fight for control, but when one of them targets the cultural artifacts of the other, it's much more than this. It's actually who that entity is. It's their dignity, their values. So in some respects, blowing up a bridge will cause economic havoc. Blowing up the statues of the Buddhas, for instance, in Afghanistan, that is true pain in a way. And I've not been to Afghanistan. When I saw the video just yesterday, I wanted to take a look. My question, how would you possibly get over that in the sense of relating to that group of people who has caused that damage? And so I wanted to ask you sort of what are your reactions to that? I mean, to some extent, is coexistence possible when the wounds go so deep and when the targets are not, your status, your control of the government, your control of the territory, but really who you are?
I don't know. I mean, this is what we're watching on daily basis. Afghanistan's peace process, for example, because of course with the Taliban there is a peace process started. I'm not talking about Daesh or and it is very complicated. I mean, it's. I talk to people, the people who are actually sitting in this peace process, and I know how they feel. But then they also see there is no other way, and hoping that democratic system and law protects them in future, because they understand what was targeted. Especially, for example, in Afghanistan, for example, Hazara community, who were actually the Buddhas were, they understand what was targeted. And but I can't say they are hopeful, and I don't know if it's possible. But then again, continuing this war is not possible either. Sometimes I ask myself how it went so wrong, because these people live together. And when you ask them about 40 years ago, Afghans have good memory of peaceful coexistence. That's another problem of never enough studies are done about the cause of the conflict. It's there is this feeling of, oh no, let's move on, but how to move on without knowing what was the problem originally? And no, I actually don't know. And but I only know that whatever happens in these countries, whoever takes over, we have to continue and work with them, with whoever who is in power, because closing the door, saying that we don't talk to these people, or these people are, or we don't believe in, I don't know. What scares me is that the Taliban take over either part of the government in Afghanistan, or like in 1996, they actually take over, and the international community decides to close the door for as long as they are in power. That's letting the Afghan people down, because if there is to be a compromise, if you close the door, there is none. And it will happen what happened in 1996 to 2001.
So now, just a quick question, because we've talked a lot about the problems, but I'm wondering if you had the authority to make the ideal cultural project for post-conflict Afghanistan, how would that look like? If you had the authority, so let's say someone come and says, you are now responsible for, you're the top advisor on culture in Afghanistan, and given all your work, you're the best placed person to do that, you'll have an unlimited amount of money. What would some of the things be that you would do? no particular order, just, what are the things is the thing that you think can make the greatest impact?
Well, this is actually the question Scott asked me in 2014 because he came and I thought, who this guy is that has so much power. Said that don't think about money, don't think about any problem, just tell me what. I said it has to be long term, it has to be government supported, and also I said it shouldn't be about people, but again, to have a dedicated team who works on these things for long term is very important. Well, I kind of had this help and this support from the government, but some aspects of culture are so political that we couldn't get involved in, and I don't know. I don't know either, other than being a head of state who has unlimited trust of people in him or her, who can fix that. Because also, even if you are a head of states, that's a problem. A head of fragile state. Every move you make to fix things will be criticized, and many of these issues, cultural issues, or causes of conflicts, wasn't fixed. I used the example of Afghanistan national identity card. It's been discussed since 2007. It's 14 years. They couldn't decide on whether or not you mentioned the name of your ethnic group in national identity card. And after 15 years, and it's funded by international community. No, it's 13 years. After 13 years, they printed a card which not only has the name of your ethnic group on it, in a country that is at war for ethnic tension. They actually, even in the ethnic groups, the name of smaller tribes also is mentioned. So, and I myself witnessed these discussions ongoing for several years in Afghanistan. And it was so political that no one could solve it. So I don't know. I mean, it's a matter of trust also, because then on the Afghan national identity card is written that nationality Afghan, but then ethnic group. But if you say that ethnic group shouldn't be, I speak the language of the country, so I follow the discussions, or one of the languages of the country. I followed up the discussions, but it seemed, and also I should say the international community was silent in all this. They never intervened. They never said, no, we're not funding a national identity card that has ethnic group on it. They never said that because they thought this is an Afghan discussion. This is an Afghan decision. So to answer your question, when I said I'm a real pessimist, this is it. Even if I had all the power and all the money, I have no solution to fix this. Because by definition, a head of state in a fragile state doesn't have the necessary trust from people to do what's necessary.
So then, something that's interesting, if we continue a bit on Afghanistan, one program that has worked is what Scott Guggenheim created, obviously with the team, which is the National Solidarity Program, and the successor today, which is the Citizens Charter Afghanistan program. And those are very much built given the fact that, as you said, there is no top-down trust because it has been eroded over so many years of war and strife. But instead, we need to find a model that can move inside the communities and identify the needs of the communities and provide them with the resources to construct the small scale infrastructure and provide the services that they need from their own perspectives. Do you think there's a case to do that for culture? to source what it is. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I totally forgot, because that was our idea of doing this culture also through Citizens Charter, and then we moved out of Afghanistan, because this is exactly Citizens Charter, or the National Solidarity Program is what has worked, and it proves that people make the right decisions. When I said that I would never criticize people for making the wrong decisions and causing the conflict, is the structures who made them. You cause the conflict. But the thing with the National Solidarity Program or Citizen Charter is also it's actually well structured, in the sense that it's built inside the Afghan government, inside the government of the country. So it's not a donor-driven process, and it's not top-down approach, because it's impossible in such a country. I think, and again, this was our last discussions in 2018 on actually introducing culture programs into Citizen Charter, allocating separate funding for cultural projects, and them for communities to decide what to do. Some community decides to restore a historical mosque, some community something else. And I think that's a good, well, I don't know why I forgot that. That's the only successful program I know, actually, long-term program I know.
Right, and but it's so interesting. But I don't think, as for other infrastructure for services, it's not a panacea that actually solves all of Afghanistan's problems, because obviously just
No, of course, because large-scale infrastructure, yeah.
well, and so on the large scale things, such as the Buddhas of Bamiyan that you worked on, the Minaret of Jam, the Herat Castle. There are two, I imagine, or this is my hypothesis, there are two main constraints apart from the political, which you discussed, which are, of course, funding and also capability to implement. So when you have those two binding constraints, how do you decide what to prioritize with the limited funding you have, and what to do in terms of restoration based on the capability and the capacity that is available locally? How do you think of those two constraints, and how to pick the best projects?
Actually, the restoration or reconstruction, rehabilitation of built heritage are the easiest and easiest to justify to donors. So I will, and also even about the capacity, I think it exists. It never worried me in Afghanistan, in the sense that even if the know-how is lost, for example, certain kinds of tiles in Herat which we needed, even if the know-how is lost, it's always possible to bring people from the region, from Uzbekistan, for example, or even to train people and do it. So about how to prioritize, I personally I prioritize this based on the value it has for the Afghan people, in the sense that, for example, the Minaret of Jam, to every Afghan you talk, they're proud of it, and it's well, Minaret of Jam is one of those projects actually difficult to implement, because it's in a very remote. I can share with you a video. It's in a very remote area in Afghanistan, in mountains of western Afghanistan. To be honest, in last years that I was in Afghanistan, I didn't feel this lack of funding, and I didn't feel the lack of capacity to implement. So it was like, okay, this is easy. Now let's move on to real culture. And while we do these projects, let's I can't say we've done it all, of course, and not that because it was easy it was done. No, It's easy to justify for everyone, and to prioritize. Well, we say that we don't want to be donor driven, but we are. I mean, there is absolutely it's always a compromise. There's absolutely no way to do that. Donors come to us, they say, because our forces are, for example, in Balkh, in northern Afghanistan, we would like to fund a project in Balkh, and then even if our priority is, I don't know, somewhere else in south of Afghanistan, you cannot convince that donor who has funding to go with what you are interested in because they have their own agenda. I just learned to work to make sure the agendas are not conflicting agendas, and to find the ways where our agendas overlap. Us, the donors, the Afghan government, and the Afghan people. For example, there is always where we can all agree on, and if I don't know if I would do it differently with regards to restoration of cultural heritage, but yeah, it's actually kind of agreed on. Donors get convinced easily, even the government in this area.
I want to go back to maybe a controversial topic, which is the listing of the ethnic group on the identity cards. Who came up with that?
No. So the Ashraf Ghani was very vocal in pushing for that, and there was even a big debate now before the. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe Sara knows that, but based on what I've read, he was, and there was again a debate now when they launched a digital version, a biometric one, in which I think they ended up not placing the ethnicity on the ID card. So it's really been a back and forth and very political.
No, it is placed now. It's very there's several versions of it if you actually look online, because they launched several pilots of this national identity card. And the 2007 one was, I don't remember, an international organization was in charge of it. I actually, to be honest, it's a very, very complicated discussion, which the reason that some people wanted, or maybe a majority wanted their ethnic group on it, because they were saying that, really, it's not a discussion I would like to get involved in because it's so complicated. They were saying that, okay, let me go back somewhere else. Did you know that Afghanistan doesn't have census because they don't like to be counted, in the sense that they don't want the ethnic group. They don't want to. They don't want a record of the population of each ethnic group. Then they are very vocal. Some ethnic groups are very vocal about their ethnic identity. Some actually they want it to be mentioned because they think they're persecuted, and it has to be taken into account for quotas for these things. And then the reason why they went from even mentioning the tribes of each ethnic group was a way to avoid having a number on the population of each ethnic group, so that it was broken into so many smaller groups to avoid this. So, and to be honest, I really don't know. It was a very complicated discussion. Because, like, for example, even the people who were against it, they wanted it on their own card. Again, I said the people who were, as a general statement, were against it. They might have been the ethnic minorities. They are the ethnic minorities. But even as an ethnic minority, they wanted it to be mentioned for a day where quotas are taken into account for ethnic minorities.
I'm asking this with a specific purpose because we've seen enough experiments in history, right, about what countries are successful and which countries don't manage to pull it together. I'm thinking Botswana here. If you're thinking sort of the African experience, which also complicated history for so many reasons. And if you're looking at Botswana's story and its current economic success, it goes back to the decision made by its leader, by its president, and I can't remember his name, but it was right after independence where it was, okay, we are fragmented. We have to move beyond tribal identities and create a shared fiction of being Botswanan. And I've always been fascinated by that because it's almost like another example of the great men in history theory of, you had the right leader at the right time that had the right vision. And now when you're looking at the levels of education, levels of income in Botswana, and sort of you're looking at what's plaguing other countries in that region. Botswana technically had just as much fragmentation as Rwanda, let's say, and you have a completely different history. So when I heard about the ethnic group being listed on the card, that is based on what we know, right? From Botswana is just one example around the world. If we don't create shared fictions, we start seeing the other everywhere we look, low levels of trust because we can only trust us, not the other.
Yes.
So if now I have to identify myself in sub groups, it just leads to less and less trust. And if we go back to economics,
more fragmentation.
Exactly. What is that going to predict in terms of stability, conflict, economics? So just a
it's a very
comment.
Complicated. No, this is how nation state building happens. This is how, in early 20th century, this is how it happened. But it becomes more and more complicated to do it because, first of all, people cannot now easily speak in front of international community about a fictional national identity because it has to be built. It has to be written in books. Afghanistan still doesn't have a common history agreed by all. I mean, the recent history is very fragmented. We can't even tell a recent history where everyone agrees on. I don't know, when was it, Botswana? When this?
So right after independence, 1960, and Paul, if you have a better date.
1960.
60,
okay.
68 or
in the 60s somewhere.
66, something like that. 1966, it was the independence. And I think the first president of independent Botswana looked at the situation and he had the vision of, okay, we have to get over tribal identities. And even the way he implemented it, it's actually replicable. And he used the civil service to send people that were not from part of that tribe to get contact. His strategy was get people from different parts of the country to be in contact. And the first tool he had available was the civil service because the government had to provide the public services.
So it was June 1964, but
yes,
very much along
64. Okay. So
I don't know intellectually if it's possible in like now because it's a very politicized process to do that. I saw that this actually even trying in Afghanistan, even it's really not my area to talk about. I just, as out of interest, I follow Afghanistan news, and I like, for example, for the provincial governors, now people don't accept a governor which is not from their area. They don't, even not from their city. They don't accept a mayor who's not from their city. And this is it's even becoming, the fragmentation is even more than before. So again, this building a national identity is what the nation states did. But is it possible now? I don't know. I doubt, because
I'm the optimist in the conversation, and actually the thing you do every day, culture.
Like Macedonia, we can use North
Yeah.
Macedonia, maybe.
I still think we can create shared fictions, and I do think that we have less tools available, but I think that the one that's still very much available to us is the cultural production. So fiction, literature, theater, music.
You're right, and they are the least controversial ones because it touches what we all share.
And they rely on emotion, and it's hard to politicize emotion unless you're turning into fear.
Well, speaking of that, there's one question I had, which I'd love to get your thoughts on, which was, we've gone back and forth in this conversation many times between structure and agency. So you mentioned Levi-Strauss and structural anthropology. And then, in a way, if I were to make punchlines of these sort of two different kind of angles, one could be, it's culture, it's the system, it's what we inherited, and therefore we will do as that system of values tells us. Even when we're not conscious of it, it could be sort of imprinted in our behavior. On the other hand, people make choices all the time, and they can make choices against those values when they are positive or negative. So I wonder, how do you, in your professional life, when you look at the role of culture in fragile states, how do you navigate between these two, let's say, poles, between the systems on the one hand and then the individual choices that can shape really a country's history? We just talked about the ID cards. Someone in Botswana made a choice that it could have been against the tradition, but that was the good choice. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Well, if I have to, I'm mostly towards the system. I mean, in the sense that I feel bad about blaming individuals. Feel bad in the sense that we are really powerless in a deteriorating situation, and at the end, is people have to make decisions based on their life experience and the human scale of their life. They think, okay, we live 30 more years. This is the decision I'm going to make, because they have to be also selfish and think about themselves. So if I have to choose or I have to make a decision about which way to go, it will be towards the system and fixing something in the system that allows people to make decisions which takes us towards cohesion. But of course, I'm aware of the importance of individuals. I am, of course, I use Levi-Strauss, but the all other important structuralists actually of a group, the Vienna Circle, who changed the paradigm of our thinking and the philosophy. They were all together. Anthropologists, Freud. I don't know if I call Freud, but this, like, for example, a circle of few people changed the paradigm of thinking in the whole world. And of course, I'm aware, like, right people in the right time, and building having a team that everyone was at their best, whatever they were doing in their job. But again, I always try to rely on that, to build a team, to do things together. And it reminded me of actually the choices that my Afghan colleagues made. For example, I had a really good team in Afghanistan, to work with, fantastic people. But at some point, one by one, I started to lose my Afghan colleagues, the team members, because they would go out of the country but not come back. And I remember that as an organization, maybe I mean, if they went on a mission for us for UNESCO and they didn't come back, we were kind of responsible. And I remember I was always saying that, but look at it at a human scale. We all, as foreigners, have an exit strategy. But especially our and actually all the good colleagues I lost, they were young women, but they didn't have exit strategy. So if they went to Europe or to the United States and became a refugee there, I never criticized them, even, like without telling us, or I thought they have to make a decision about their own life, not to stay here and do this good program you're doing together. Because look now, Taliban might actually come, even if they stayed and do a good job. So I'm always inclined about. I mean, not blaming people, because anyway things are deteriorating whatever we do.
Yeah, and so building a little bit on that, but moving in the opposite direction. So the implication of culture, or one implication of culture, is of course creating awareness, showing it to the rest of the world, which hopefully in many cases attracts tourism, which then creates economic gain and etc. And you mentioned this earlier as well. But there is a certain challenge, potentially ethically or in that regard, when it comes to tourism in a post-conflict country. Could you speak a little bit to that and how you thought about that in Afghanistan, and kind of, yeah, what that meant to you?
What do you mean by ethical challenge?
So there is a certain aspect, for example, coming to a post-conflict country, looking at the devastation, the remnants of war, etc. As a tourist, and there are certain papers, articles that talk about that as something that outsiders shouldn't be doing, because it is not, could be seen as not ethical.
I understand. I never actually thought about that, because we never reached to in that. I mean, we never reached there that anyone comes and sees. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe in Cambodia you can go and to museums with skulls of people killed. Yeah, but in Afghanistan I only worked on. I know, I understand your question. It's an ethical general question. It's not my specific experience, but I'm just saying it's if I think, I'm sure I'll have a view about it, but it's not that something that I thought about, because never had to deal with it, because there we only worked on local tourism, and this is, I think, where this is what the solution is in these countries for short term. Short term, I mean 10, 15 years, not because of course it's about. I actually don't know when will be the time when people can feel comfortable to travel to Afghanistan, because it's a matter of branding also. How many years it takes to fix Afghanistan's branding? That was actually one of our thematic areas in the national program. It is for culture and creative economy in Afghanistan, was rebranding Afghanistan. But they all go together, hand in hand. You can't work to rebrand Afghanistan in international world while there are attacks in schools killing kids, hundreds of kids. Yeah, I never had to deal with that aspect of tourism. But I know there are ethical decisions on daily basis, and sometimes I tell myself I'm lucky not to be in a decision-making position in a government like that. And I know colleagues, friends actually, who were in decision-making positions in the Afghan government, who resigned because of this constantly being in this situation of ethical dilemma of what to do, what's the right, what's the wrong thing.
So I wanted to go back to what you had said about the Vienna Circle, the right people with the right ideas, but they were also in the right system that allowed them to do the thinking, to get together, to help those ideas grow and to spread them. So we talked about the system, the international organizations, we talked about the role of the government. I want to see if you have any thoughts on the role of the private sector and NGOs, specifically in helping restore or grow the cultural economy, restore the cultural heritage in Afghanistan.
Yes, of course. The NGOs and the basically the part that is related to building a civil society. This is the important role. I mean that I can think of, and the private sector, of course. I mean, creative economy has to be. It cannot be a government-run system, like any other industry. It has to be private sector, but we're really far from those decisions, unless it's something is picked up by already. Like, for example, the carpet weaving is picked up by private sector in Afghanistan, and it's working. And I mean, that you need to do a few here and there modifications in the system, for example, to facilitate export, or to establish design schools, for example, because this is what Afghanistan is missing, the creative part of what the difference between what is making something, what is the handicraft one, what makes something an art. That design aspect is missing, so that's a fixing of the system. Or for example, Afghanistan carpet is being exported in the world as Pakistan carpet, because there are some maybe Scott also told you a few of them. Some of the problems in Afghanistan are like, people, when you tell people, they cannot believe this is possible, like how on earth this is possible. But the reason, for example, that we worked with Afghanistan carpet associations and the association of the private sector that are exporting, the reason the Afghanistan carpet is being, which could rebrand Afghanistan, which being exported as Iranian or Pakistani carpet, is that they have to pay to the customs, to the Afghanistan customs. They pay per square. They pay an amount per square meter for export.
For exports.
So they have.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'm sorry. The Economist in me is like, really?
Yes. So because there is something about like it's not it's a kind of a tax. So they have to. The government would like to report a higher value of export of carpet from Afghanistan. So they put a higher value per square meter. This means that, for example, if an Afghan carpet is $10 per $100 per square meter, the government put $100 per square meter. Then, when they want to import it to a country like South Africa, they have to pay the import tax is per $100 they put. For example, 25% of that $100. That makes carpet very expensive. While in Pakistan, instead of putting $100, they pay $50. They put it at $50 per square meter, and the money they have to pay for imports to South Africa is half of that, $25, which is like 12. Mm-hmm. So they makes a carpet exported from Pakistan will become like 62 per square meter. $62 per square meter, and exported from Afghanistan become $125 per square meter, which makes it much more expensive to export from Afghanistan. So they actually do it the same carpet. They do it from Pakistan. And what we suggested to them is that why government has to report this per value of dollar. Why government can't just report per square meter? They can say, well, actually, I don't know, 12,000 square meter carpet was exported from Afghanistan last year. So I'm just really simple things that seems that you can't believe is happening, but it's happening. And this is about fixing small things in the system. Yeah.
It seems to me the government is misplacing its creativity efforts. It's using creativity in the balance of payments and current account rather than in the developing the
Perhaps
creative
that was a
economy.
part of the National Creativity Project too. Training the accountants.
Well, Scott did I think they are still working to fix these things at the Ministry of Finance. This is where all this decision is made. And to train, seriously, it's a lot about fixing the system. And really, sometimes very small issues in the system.
So building on that and kind of moving towards a wrap up, looking towards the future, what would be your top 3 priorities for helping the system of development and post-conflict development to evolve in such a way that culture could be more easily incorporated into the various initiatives, plans, and projects that are implemented?
I think the most important, this is what I learned, and I hasn't been proven wrong so far, is a partnership with the government of the country. So we have to move on from partnership with donors and with international communities and with sister agencies. We understand each other, but that's not the partnership we want. The main partnership has to be with the government. And once we have this partnership with the government, it has to be how do you call it, strengthened with funding. It means that the government puts money, believes in the partnership enough to put money in the partnership. I'm saying in terms of culture, if we are to build a culture program. If I am asked to advise on a new post-conflict reconstruction, the first thing I advise is to build a long-term partnership with the government, preferably 30-year. I understand also governments, they have 5-year reconstruction plans or not long, but you can have a 30-year vision and, for example, a 10-year program. So you have 3 priorities: building partnership with the government, and the partnership to be long-term, not bound to any of these donor funding cycles, and that the partnership has funding from the host country. Whenever people put money in somewhere, they actually become very committed to follow up, and I think then from there you can build. Already when international community sees that the government who's the post-conflict, reconstruction government is involved financially in a partnership, that shows that what is important for the government, and others will follow.
I wanted to ask you,
and I think
a very small wrap-up to the wrap-up. It almost sounds like for us to engage effectively in culture in post-conflict countries, we need to know also more about the role of culture and the value in our own societies. Because ultimately it's about where we come from and our roots. So do you see the people you worked with, whether they're in the UN system or in other places, NGOs, do you see an appreciation for that?
Oh, definitely. And this is why I'm saying I'm puzzled. Everyone is interested. Yes. I feel an appreciation, and of course, in many of countries, culture is very well taken into account for reconstruction, very much valued. So yes, yes, I feel an appreciation for culture. It's just that from this appreciation to practically working towards promoting it, there is a missing link. Which again, I said I understand. There is it's short-term program. It doesn't bring quick win. As Mihaela said, you cannot prove, or we don't have a record of the economic value of it. Yeah, but I definitely, that's why I said I never feel frustrated, because I mean you don't even need to prove to anyone that it's important. It's just that the next step is difficult.
Definitely. And this has really been a fascinating discussion, Sara. We've moved from Levi Strauss and the cultural and the structuralism school of anthropology through Tajikistan. Spent a lot of time in Afghanistan looking at how we need to fix structures and not blame the people when things go wrong in culture, identifying that the main issue is that culture is not on the agenda, in part because the timelines of culture doesn't align with the timelines and the ways of measuring outcomes that development uses in general. So if we take a longer term view, that might be one solution. Another one that we discussed was how to use a cultural lens or cultural paradigm when thinking about things that we think are completely unrelated to culture, such as mining and urban planning. We also reflected on the role of culture in terms of expanding the dreams and aspirations of children. And you mentioned the amazing program that you did in Herat, where in a few months' time, you helped children move from thinking about the jobs of their parents to something completely different and much more expansive. We also discussed how a lack of longitudinal data on the outcomes of culture really hampers funding towards culture, and how the culture not being on the agenda leads to not being able to measure the value of culture, which then leads to the lack of funding of culture, so that again we're not able to put it on the agenda. And this is really the vicious circle that you described for us. Finally, some of the solutions lie in finding a partnership with the local governments in these countries, not so much with the donors, making it really long-term, preferably 30 years, and finding funding that is disconnected from donor funding cycles, and creating incentives between the government and these cultural projects that align them by making the government invest in culture. So thank you so much for that fascinating conversation, Sara.
Wow, I'm amazed how well you briefed it. 2 hours, it was great. Thank you. I like to hear it.
Really, of course, we will
Thank
share
you.
it with you. And
thank you for your time.
And to all of our listeners, we just want to say thank you for tuning into F-World, the Fragility podcast. We hope that you found our conversation with Sara Noshadi interesting and inspirational, and we sure did. Please subscribe where you listen to podcasts. And if you want to know more about F-World, please visit our website, f-world.org, and follow us on Twitter @FWorldPodcast. Thank you for listening.